Welcome for some more affordable fixed blade content. If you've been following my channel, you know I've been looking at a lot of Scandi ground knives recently. I really come to appreciate what those edges can do, and I finally got around to checking out some Ukrainian companies, starting with BPS. In the last review, we took a look at their Fin Light. It's an awesome little knife, lives in my pocket most days now. But today we're going to take a look at the first BPS knife I bought, well, mostly because the Fin Light wasn't available at the time, but this design did indeed intrigue me. And you know from the title we're talking about the HK1, specifically the model HK1 CSHF. And it is indeed a very interesting little knife. Let's start as we usually do by talking about the sheath. And it comes with one of their standard sheaths. I've actually bought the sheath separately for a couple of my other knives. They run for around $17 US on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. But for that, you're getting a really robust, thick leather sheath that does indeed come with a ferro rod and, well, two mounting options. You've got a belt loop and a dangler. But as many other reviewers have pointed out, this being a standard size sheath looks a little big for this knife. Most of the grip is down inside it. This is a 4-inch blade. Compare that to, well, the same sheath comes with the bigger Adventurer, which we will be talking about next. The Adventurer has a 5¼ inch blade, and yeah, that seems to be, well, shall we say, better proportioned, and I do have plenty of real estate to grab a hold of the exposed grip to deploy it. With the HK1, because there's almost nothing sticking out, I do really rely on having the lanyard to assist me. Quick note about my use of the lanyard. I talked about this in the Fin Light review. The leather lanyard didn't come with it. I added it myself. Measured out about 2 feet of this cord, looped it through, tied it off. Gives me enough length to use my preferred method, which is to hook the lanyard with the thumb, run it over the back of my hand, and then it settles right into my grip. And I do this because I don't really like the lanyard around my wrist. It allows me to change hands or put the knife away without, well, kind of feeling entangled. Now, if I wanted in the reverse grip, because of the way this hole is mounted, I can just about loop the lanyard the other way around all 4 of my fingers and have it settle into my hand. With other knives that have the lanyard up a bit higher, I often have to do it through 3 of my fingers, and then I basically got that. Let's talk about the friendly end. There are a lot of interesting design details in the build of this knife that are also reflected in the grip scales. Dual beveling at the top, the cutaway at the butt for the lanyard hole that exposes, yes, the full tang. 2 fairly robust walnut scales. Now, the Fin Light had ash scales, but I do tend to see walnut more often on these Ukrainian knives. Secured with a pair of screws that are not flush, but they're not hot spots either. They make for some interesting indexing points. We'll talk about that more in handling. And speaking of handling, okay, rounded front to back, flat on the sides for indexing. Palm swell. I really like palm swells. Bit of a flare here at the base of the grip to help retain my hand. We'll talk about how that curvature of the butt also works when we get to handling. But as you can see up here at the top, there's no real choil guard, which is a concern in martial handling, but in utility use it does allow me to get my fingers really close to the base of the edge for fine work, clean transition on the spine that allows me to get my thumb straight up into some really aggressive jimping for good leverage. I'm going to say the grip is very comfortable, very secure. Functional dimension, point to point. 4 inches 10 centimeters, which makes the grip as long as the blade, creating a very, well, balanced design. Before we talk about the blade, how much did I pay for the thing? It's currently going for around $38 on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. And they have a couple of different versions of this knife. The CSHF is a carbon steel version that, as you saw with the sheath, comes with a ferro rod. And their carbon steel of choice is 1066. We talked about this a bit in the Fin Light review. I'm used to seeing that steel on swords more than knives. But that Fin Light held up really well, and my test files say, as advertised, this is running probably around 57, 58 HRC, and we'll certainly see how it held up. And speaking of holding up, though, unlike the Fin Light that had kind of a brushed finish, this has a mirror polish, and it's absolutely showing staining from use. That's food prep, exposure to weather, and, tree sap, using it for carving and stuff like that. Not bad. I may eventually just go ahead and patina the thing. Shape of the blade, again, some interesting design features. Jimping on the back, it's kind of swept forward just a little bit with a pronounced belly and a bit of a recurve in here. We'll talk about how it performs. Also, that tip is a bit reinforced as that edge bevel gets a bit steeper towards the tip. Mirror polish on the sides, but the spine is left coarse and certainly sharp enough to effectively strike a ferro rod. Blade length, as mentioned, as long as the grip, 4 inches, 10 centimeters. At its widest point of the belly, that's 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. And stock thickness is a little bit over 2.5 millimeters. So not the thinnest, not the thickest, but let's go ahead and roll in the test footage and we'll talk about how it performs. Carving in January. The HK1. Really do like the jimping on the back. I may add it to some of the other knives that don't have it. We have very positive grip, lots of leverage and control. Make use of the belly and the recurve. Oh yeah. Very nice knife for fine carving tasks. Let's go a little heavier. Yeah. Really nice bite into the wood. Really good grip and leverage. Belly, recurve, yeah, all work really nicely for doing this. Yeah, for its size, really great knife. Alright, let's get a little bit more abusive. Not the thickest branch, but let's go ahead and see what it can do. Turned in the wood, but otherwise no problem. I don't have a lot of blade to work with here, but let's see how it does. Oh, yeah. Sailed through that. All right, so this is not only the post-test edge, but also the post-use edge. I've had this for a couple of months, put it to food prep, utility use, cutting up packaging, using it in the yard for carving, delimbing, rendering smaller pieces of branches. Now let's see how it's doing now. Yeah, still very keen. And yes, shaving sharp out of the box, but okay, yes, I do have some challenges sometimes in the transition between the belly and the recurve. How about some cardboard? Yep. Once I get the bite right on that recurve, it sails right through. So how'd it do? Other than some staining, the blade has taken no damage in the tests and use I put it to, barely needed to refresh it. But a couple of issues do come up with the design in specifically the most martial test, thrusting and stabbing. First into my pel, which is multiple layers of thick cardboard backed up by a couple of inches of compressed brown paper bag paper up against my redwood target, and to test into harder media straight into the redwood. What am I looking for? Well, one is penetration and channel into the softer media, and yeah, despite this point being kind of broad, penetration and channel into the media was pretty impressive. Into the hardwood, it's about tip durability, and as I said, the edge bevel kind of steepens out to reinforce that tip, didn't take any damage. But I'm also looking specifically at how that linear impact is translated back into me. Does my hand stay put? Any uncomfortable collisions? Well, there's really nothing uncomfortable to collide with, but as for staying put, it is a fairly grippy material, but no guard here. So thrusting in forward and reverse grip, edge facing towards me and away from me. Forward grip, edge facing away from me, I'm going to pretty much exclusively use a screwdriver grip. Plant the butt of the knife in the hollow of my hand for reinforcement to keep my hand from sliding up into danger. It's about the safest way to do it with a knife of this kind of design that doesn't have anything to stop your hand here. Problem is with this grip shape, trying to do screwdriver grip facing the other way, yeah, that is really uncomfortable, and I stopped almost immediately. Reverse grip, my hand actually stayed put pretty well without reinforcing it with my thumb, which I could absolutely do and would recommend. But again, there is a bias in the shape of the grip that favors doing it with the edge facing away from you, edge facing towards you. Yeah, that's really pointy and uncomfortable and not recommended. Feels quite awkward in hand. But moving on to utility use, I did forego the bamboo test, hacking and slashing into a piece of hard bamboo to see if I can induce chip or roll and fragile edge, because that has been a recipe for disaster in all of the Scandi ground knives. So went on to the fine carving, and yeah, it was a great carving tool. I could get a good grip on it, especially with the jimping, lots of leverage. I do want to put some of this jimping on other knives that don't have it. Could get really close to the edge and make interesting use of the belly and the recurve. In deeper carving, feather sticking, making stakes and stuff like that, that's actually pretty good in terms of, again, the leverage and bite of this edge. Not only the geometry, but I really have come to love these Scandi ground knives. Moving on to batoning, it's not a really sizable knife, so probably not primarily designed for that, maybe for smaller jobs. So I did go ahead and try it with some of the smaller jobs, and yeah, in batoning it worked fine and survived without taking any damage whatsoever. Again, the only damage this knife is showing is staining on the mirror finish. Before we get to my martial adventures with this knife, this is usually where we talk about the balance between utility and martial usefulness they could make for an ideal carry knife, also help you out with optics. If you happen to be somewhere with people who are sensitive to you carrying a weapon, some of those people might be law enforcement, being able to justify your carry as a tool that also looks like a tool can be very helpful. And I have to say that even in my country, there is a strong negative bias against using edged weapons for defense. And that is both socially and legally speaking. So knife as tool that looks like tool can maybe help keep you out of some trouble. But we also have to talk about the argument that the knife probably was not designed with martial use in mind. And I'm going to have to agree with you. As a utility tool, it's awesome. It's pretty much maximized to be an all-around good small to medium-sized utility blade. And it's proven itself in that. And we've already talked about in the testing, there might be some drawbacks to trying to use it as a martial knife. But there are cultures that do indeed use one knife for that, well, all-around use. Most of its time is going to be spent as a tool, but it might need to be used in a pinch as a defensive implement, even though it doesn't have a guard on it. So let's go ahead and talk about that. To talk about this knife martially, I'm going to fall back on something I'll call the small puko argument. Recently, a commenter got really heated that knives like this are not designed for self-defense. They should never be used for self-defense. And my suggestion that they could be made me straight up delusional. Well, we can talk about my mental health later, but in terms of something like a small puko, I bet there's some Finnish folks that would disagree. But I've also been looking at some objective criteria for what makes a martial knife versus a utility knife, and one common criteria is minimum blade length of 3.5 inches, 9 centimeters. Okay, that does have more than 3.5 inches, 9 centimeters, but it is lacking a lot of the agreed upon necessary features of the friendly end, which would be either a guard of some sort or substantial choil or other substantial grooves in the handle to keep your hand put under linear impact, to keep it from sliding into danger, thrusting and stabbing. And this is where you have to make your adaptations, which come with certain restrictions. Also, when it comes to a knife of this blade length, yes, it does have a very keen edge, nice belly and recurve. I should be able to use it for some slashing, but unfortunate reality has taught us that because this is not a cleaver or a chopper, my most effective tool is going to be the point. And while this point geometry did very nicely into my soft media in terms of penetration and channel, I can also see on my spectrum of tip geometries from needle to shovel, it's a little bit more on the shovel end of things, might struggle to get through thick clothing. So consider that. But speaking of adaptations, if I'm going to be doing any thrusting or stabbing with it in the forward grip, as I've already mentioned, the grip shape restricts me to pretty much edge facing away from me, screwdriver grip. Plant that butt in the hollow of my hand, choke down. Yeah, I can still do a little slashing with it, but yeah, it's going to be my most secure, safest grip for doing any kind of thrusting or stabbing. And I'm going to have to make similar adaptations in the reverse grip. But this is where I would normally talk about transitions. As I mentioned in the Thin Light video, well, having a lanyard on does restrict me from using a lot of my favorite one-handed transition techniques like pinch flipping and finger twirling. I do have my own flashy method for transitioning a knife with a lanyard, which again, as I mentioned in the Thin Light video, I'm not going to show you because it's dangerous as hell. Kids do not try it at home. I think razor blade nunchucks. Let Mike continue to make his own bad decisions. Speaking of his questionable mental health, yeah, so we'll just leave that there and not think about it anymore. And I'm going to say definitely transition the knife, if you're using a lanyard, in 2 hands. And like I said, shape of grip, most secure, most comfortable, can do my best thumb lock with the edge facing away from me versus towards me. And yeah, a knife of this length gives me good leverage and control. I could make some good use of slashing with that. But my most effective tool is probably going to be the point. And if I lock it in nice and firm, I can make really good use of it. Yeah, it might meet some resistance going through thick material, but tip has proven itself sturdy, so it's not going to bend or chip on me. Speaking of sturdy, could I use the full tang of the butt end as an impact tool? Absolutely. It's got a nice little point on there. Also some exposed metal. Might be able to use it as a glass breaker in a pinch. There is that. And you'll notice kind of what I'm doing there to get that is I'm locking my thumb over the top of the grip scale. Yeah, that gives me a good solid hit with it. Would probably knock the scales loose, but, you know, easily fixed. But, okay, let's stop the conversation here. If you have any questions about this knife, other Ukrainian-made blades, other Scandi ground knives you'd like to recommend, keep all that coming. The next BPS knife we're going to look at is the very popular Adventurer. Until then, as always, thank you all so much for watching, liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, following my journey, putting up with my madness, speaking of my mental health. And I hope to see you back for Adventure time. Adventurer time?